When we moved into the house on Belridge Lane, I remember the realtor kept calling it a peaceful little neighborhood with real character. My daughter Emily was only 7 at the time. Bright, sensitive, the kind of kid who asked way too many questions about things like shadows and why the stars looked like they were blinking. The first few nights were uneventful. Boxes everywhere, late dinners, mismatched socks. You know, the usual moving chaos. The backyard was one of the house's best features. Wide open space, soft grass, an old oak tree with branches thick enough for swinging. We didn't even have curtains up yet, just beds and blackout dreams. But on the 4th night, things started to feel off. I woke around 12:15 a.m. to the sound of something faint. Tap, 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 like the wind flicking a branch against the window. I almost ignored it until I heard Emily's tiny voice from her room across the hall. "Daddy!" she called out. I got up, half asleep, and found her standing on her bed, peering out the window that overlooked the backyard. The room was cold, colder than it should have been for early spring. "What are you doing up?" I asked. Her eyes didn't leave the glass. "They're playing again," she whispered. "Who is?" She turned to me, confused, like I should already know. "The kids in the backyard." I glanced out the window beside her. Nothing. Just a moonlit yard, still as a painting. The old tree swayed a little, but otherwise, empty. "Honey, there's no one there." "There was," she insisted. "They were playing tag. One of them touched the tree and disappeared, and the others just laughed. But they don't talk loud. They play quiet." I didn't know what to say, so I gave her the classic dad line. Must have been a dream. But her face dropped, and she tugged at my sleeve. "They're not a dream, Daddy. One of them saw me." That stuck with me. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. No fear, just a strange seriousness. Like she wasn't even scared. Just warning me. The next morning, over breakfast, I told my wife, Jess, about it. She just shrugged it off. Kids have weird dreams. When I was her age, I thought the closet was a doorway to the ocean. I laughed. We didn't take it seriously. We should have. The next night, I made a point to check the backyard before bed. Everything looked normal, but I left the curtains open a little, just enough to keep an eye on things. At exactly 12:03 a.m., Emily knocked on our bedroom door. "They're back," she said softly. Jess groaned beside me. "Again?" But I was already getting up. We stood together at her bedroom window, both of us looking out. Nothing. Just like before. "See?" I said, ruffling her hair. "Empty." She didn't answer. She just stared and pointed. "He's hiding behind the tree now. He's smiling." Her finger was shaking. There was no one there. I walked outside with a flashlight. I don't know why. Maybe to show her everything was fine. Maybe to reassure myself. The air was colder than it had been earlier. Still. The kind of stillness that feels staged. I walked around the tree. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of anyone. And yet, when I looked up at Emily's window, I saw her standing there, wide-eyed and silent. That's when I noticed it. The swing hanging from the tree was moving. Just slightly. Like someone had pushed it a moment ago. But there was no wind. I didn't tell Jess. I didn't want to encourage Emily's imagination. That's what I told myself. But deep down, something was clawing at me. Not fear. Not yet. Just unease. Like we were living in a story we hadn't read the ending to yet. The next few nights were quiet. Emily didn't wake up. No tapping, no whispers, no quiet kids. We started to relax. But the calm never lasts, does it? The night before Emily's 8th birthday, I woke up again around midnight. No tapping this time. Just silence. And then I saw it. A faint light flickering in the backyard. I got up, walked to the window, and froze. There were children in the yard. 6 of them. All standing still under the oak tree. Their backs were to me. And one of them was holding Emily's favorite doll. I didn't sleep after I saw the children in the backyard. 6 of them. Perfectly still. The moonlight turned their skin into this pale, cold wax, like mannequins dressed up in hand-me-downs. One of them was clutching Emily's doll, Rosie, the one she refused to sleep without, the one I tucked into her arms just a few hours before. By the time I rushed outside, they were gone. Just gone. No footsteps, no laughter, not even that weird swing motion that used to bother me. Everything was frozen in place, as if nothing had ever happened. Except, Rosie was gone from Emily's bed. That was real. I wanted to tell Jess, but how could I? I still didn't believe what I saw myself. I stood there under the tree until I felt stupid, then came back inside and made up a story about forgetting the porch light. Emily didn't say anything the next day. No drawings. No strange talk. It was almost like she was trying to protect us now. But that night, everything changed. I was half asleep again when I heard Emily's voice. This time, not calling for me. Just talking. I crept to her door. It was open just a crack. I could see her kneeling at the window, her face pressed to the glass, whispering like she was reciting lines from a play. "I don't know how to jump like that," she said. A pause. "I don't have hair that long." Another pause. "I can try." I pushed the door open. "Emily?" She whipped around. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "They're jumping rope now," she whispered. "They said I have to learn. But I don't think the rope is really a rope." I walked straight to the window. I didn't want to, but I did. And I saw them. 3 children, illuminated by the moon, standing in a triangle, 2 of them turning the rope, the third one jumping. But the rope, it moved too slow, too heavy, like it was dragging something wet with every swing. That's when I realized. It was hair. Long, dark, matted hair. Thick as rope. Each end clenched in small, pale fists. The jumper was a girl. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle, like it barely hung on. With every bounce, her body jolted too hard, like her limbs were slightly out of sync. But it wasn't until the rope stopped that my breath caught in my throat. All 3 children turned toward the house in perfect unison. Their faces, no eyes, just smooth, sunken pits. Like something had scooped the eyes out and left them hollow. Skin stretched tight where sockets should be. And then, one of them smiled. The kind of smile that's not made for happiness. Too wide. Too knowing. I stepped back. Emily didn't scream. She just looked at me and said, "That one's name is Lucy." "Emily," I whispered. "How do you know that?" "They told me. Lucy doesn't like when people stare at her face. She wants me to come out tomorrow and jump with them. She said I can use my own hair if I want." My knees felt weak. I scooped her up and took her to our room. Jess stirred, asked what was going on, and I mumbled something about a nightmare. But Emily wasn't crying. She just kept whispering to herself, "If I mess up the game, they'll take my eyes too." I didn't sleep that night. I watched the backyard until sunrise. The kids were gone. But something had changed in Emily. Like the line between the game and real life had started to blur. And the next morning, we found something on the porch. Rosie, the doll, placed neatly on the welcome mat, with 2 black buttons sewn over her eyes. It started with a sound. Not a loud one. Not even enough to wake anyone else. But I heard it, scraping, low and steady, like tiny fingers dragging across wood. The kind of sound you don't notice at first, until it becomes the only thing you can hear. It came from under Emily's bed. The first time she mentioned it, Jess rolled her eyes. "It's probably just mice," she said. "Old house. These things creak and settle." But Emily was adamant. "They're not mice," she said. "They don't have claws. They have nails, little ones, and they scratch letters, not holes." Jess just gave me that look. "You know the one, the you're the parent with the ghost obsession, not me look." I agreed to check under the bed, just to prove her wrong. It was dustier than I expected. Cold. The wood smelled old, almost sour, like it had been wet once and never dried right. I didn't see any mice, but I saw something else. Marks. Etched into the wood, crude and uneven, like something had been trying to write with broken fingernails. 4 words. Let her out. I sat there, under the bed, staring at the words like I was waiting for them to disappear. Like they were just dust patterns I'd misread. But the longer I looked, the clearer they became. Let her. Outside, I crawled out and didn't say anything to Emily. I didn't want to scare her. But that night, I didn't sleep. Around 12:06 a.m., I heard the scratching again. This time, it wasn't under her bed. It was in the walls. I pressed my ear to the drywall. Slow, steady movement, like fingernails gliding across old wallpaper. Then a pause. And then, 3 taps. Not random. Intentional. Like someone knocking to be let in. I walked the house with a flashlight. Jess stayed asleep, but I checked every wall, every vent. Nothing. But when I went back to Emily's room, she was awake, sitting up in bed, watching me. They told me her name is Lucy, she said calmly. I didn't answer. She's stuck. She said I should listen close because she's almost out. She said if I'm quiet enough, I can hear her breathing in the floor. My stomach dropped. Emily, you're dreaming again. She's scared of the others, she whispered. They made her play too. But she didn't win. So they put her down there. And now she wants to come back. I didn't know what to say. Then she added softly. She said if I help her out, they'll let me keep my eyes. The next morning I forced myself to look again. The writing was still there under the bed. But now, more letters had been added. Frantic, carved over and over, desperate to be seen. Let her out. Let her out. Let her out. And next to it, drawn in faint brownish smears, was a handprint. A small one. Too small to be mine. Too fresh to be old. I didn't tell Jess. But that night, when we turned off the lights and tried to sleep, I could still hear it. Scratch. 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 Tap. 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 Like someone right beneath us was trying to spell their way out of the dark. We hadn't touched the attic since we moved in. You know how it is. You tell yourself you'll get to the boxes, eventually, but weeks turn into months, and soon the attic becomes that forgotten space where things go to collect dust in silence. Until Emily asked to go up there. She said it so casually over breakfast one morning. Can we look in the attic today? I think there's something up there Lucy wants me to see. Jess and I just froze. We hadn't told her the attic was even accessible yet. The pull-down ladder was still tucked away, and she'd never seen us go up. Who's Lucy? I asked. Emily blinked like it was the dumbest question in the world. The girl on the floor. Jess said no, firmly. We argued about it later. She thought I was indulging Emily too much. I thought we were ignoring too many warning signs. Eventually, curiosity won. I climbed up that night while Jess took Emily to her piano lesson. Dust was everywhere. Piled boxes, faded furniture, a broken rocking horse in the corner that looked like it hadn't moved in decades. And then, tucked inside an old photo album marked Belridge Lane, 1950s, I found it. A photograph. Black and white. Faded at the edges. 7 children in the backyard, standing under that same twisted oak tree. One of them was turned away, but the other 6 were smiling. Though not the way kids usually smile. Their eyes didn't match their mouths. The smiles were stiff. Too forced. Like someone told them to smile, but didn't tell them why. The middle girl had long hair and ribbons, her face soft and rounded. She wore a plaid dress and had a doll in one hand. On the back, someone had scribbled in pencil, Lucy, 1954. Her favorite game was hide and seek. I stared at the name. Lucy. I felt something cold creep down my spine. I flipped through the album. No more photos of her. Just that one. Just that frozen moment. I took the picture downstairs. I didn't know what I was hoping for. Confirmation? Denial? But when Emily saw it, her face lit up. That's her, she said. That's Lucy. That's the game she doesn't like anymore. What game? I asked. Hide and seek, she said flatly. She was it for too long. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went online and started digging through newspaper archives. It took hours, but I found it. A single article from 1955, buried deep in a local historical site. Local girl missing, presumed dead. 7-year-old Lucy Carter disappeared from her home on Belridge Lane in May 1954. Authorities searched for weeks but found no trace. Neighbors reported unusual activity around the time of her disappearance, but investigators closed the case due to insufficient evidence. The family moved away the following year. The house has changed owners multiple times since. No cause, no clues, no body. I shut the laptop, my hands shaking. The words carved under Emily's bed. Let her out. The jump rope made of hair. The doll with sewn-on button eyes. Now it all made a terrible kind of sense. These weren't just hallucinations or dreams. These children weren't just playing. They were replaying. Something broken. Something cruel. Something that never ended. I told Jess everything that night. She didn't say much. She just stared at the photo, then at Emily, who was sitting quietly in the hallway, humming. When we asked her what she was doing, she said, "Lucy told me she left something in the dirt under the swing. She wants me to find it. If I do," she said, "she might finally win." "Win what?" I asked. Emily looked up, eyes wide. The game they never let her stop playing. It started with a drawing. Emily had always been into crayons and markers, but this one was different. She didn't call us over. She didn't ask for praise. She just left it on the hallway wall, like a message. I noticed it when I went to grab laundry from the dryer. At first glance, I thought it was just crayon. But when I got closer, it wasn't crayon. It was dark red, smeared, uneven. The kind of red that dries brown. It looked, felt, like blood. And what she'd drawn. A circle. Sharp and perfect, etched over and over until it burned into the paint. Inside the circle, stick figure children surrounded a central figure marked with a large red X across the chest. Some of the other children had hollow faces. One had a black smear where the eyes should be. But it was the caption that froze me. In her tiny handwriting, scrawled above the scene, "Red Moon." My turn next. I called Jess. She came running, her hand flying to her mouth. "What the hell is this?" Emily stepped into the hallway like she'd been waiting to be called. "It's just a game," she said. "They said it's my turn now. Everyone gets a turn when the red moon comes." "What red moon?" Jess asked, trying to stay calm. Emily smiled. "Tonight." We scrubbed the wall. I locked every door and window. Jess hid the scissors, the kitchen knives, the crayons, everything. But none of it mattered. That night, I woke up to the sound of the front door creaking open. I jumped out of bed, Jess right behind me, and we ran straight to Emily's room. Empty. Curtains blowing from an open window, moonlight pouring in, and out in the yard, under the twisted oak tree. Emily. She was standing in the middle of a circle drawn in the dirt, and around her, 6 children. They weren't solid, not exactly. More like shadows wearing skin. Their heads tilted at strange angles. Their clothes faded. Their hair floating as if they were underwater. They were chanting, but there was no sound. Their mouths moved in perfect unison, wide and slow, like a silent nursery rhyme from hell. And above them, the moon. Blood red. So bright it looked wrong. Too close. Too angry. I screamed her name and ran outside, but as I crossed the porch, I stopped. Something was keeping me there, not a force, a feeling. The primal, crawling terror that something terrible would happen if I got too close. Jess pushed past me. She didn't stop. She grabbed Emily and yanked her out of the circle, and just like that, the children vanished. Like steam. Like breath on a mirror. The moon faded back to white. Emily collapsed in Jess's arms, whispering one thing over and over. I wasn't ready. I messed up the game. We brought her inside, locked every door, sat with her until she fell asleep. Then we noticed her hands, both palms, scraped raw, covered in little red symbols, like she'd been clawing into the dirt. Jess went to clean them, but Emily flinched and hissed like she'd been burned. The next day, we found the circle still there, burned into the grass. Not chalk, not paint. The grass was dead, shriveled into the shape of a perfect ring. And in the center, where Emily had stood, something was buried. A tiny object, half sunken. We brushed away the dirt and found a child's tooth, yellowed and cracked, wrapped in red thread. I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe because I knew we were too deep now, too close to whatever red moon really meant. And I had this feeling, this sinking, stomach-churning certainty that Emily hadn't been playing that night. She'd been practicing. The shovel wasn't ours. That's what disturbed me first. It was old, rusted, half buried in the mud by the swing set. Its handle wrapped in something dark and rotten-looking, like torn cloth or something worse. Jess found it the morning after Red Moon, sticking up like a crooked finger pointing at the sky. "Did you leave this out here?" she asked. I hadn't. Neither had she. We chalked it up to junk from the previous owners. Until that night. 1 a.m., I woke to the sound of metal against earth. The rhythmic shh, thud, shh, thud. I bolted out of bed and ran to the back window, and there she was, Emily, digging, barefoot, her nightgown soaked in dew, her hands wrapped around the rusted shovel like she'd been holding it forever. Her movements weren't frantic. They were practiced. Almost ritualistic. Jess screamed her name, but Emily didn't stop. We rushed outside. As we got closer, the smell hit us. Sweet rot. Earth that had been wet for too long. Earth that hadn't been touched in decades. I tried to take the shovel from her, but she screamed like I was hurting her. Not her body, her soul. "She's under here," Emily shrieked. "They said I have to help or they'll keep me too." Her voice was raw, her eyes wild. Jess took her inside. I stayed behind. And I dug. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd find nothing and could finally end this madness. Or maybe part of me believed her. The dirt was soft. Too soft. As if something beneath it was still decaying. I dug through layers of wet roots and black mud until I hit something that wasn't dirt. Fabric. Torn. Moldy. Blue, with a faded white collar. I froze. Then I pulled more. And that's when I saw it. Hair. Long, matted strands tied with a pink ribbon. I dropped the shovel. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. And then, teeth. A child's skull. Tiny. Jagged. Partially shattered. Jess was screaming from the porch. But Emily, she was standing at the window, smiling. We called the police. They sent people, dug it up, took it seriously for a while. Turns out the bones were human, child size, and they'd been down there for decades. But no fingerprints, no dental records, nothing to connect them to anyone. We told them about Lucy, the photograph, the article from 1955. They listened, they nodded. But the case was closed 2 weeks later. Inconclusive historical remains. That's what they wrote on the report. But things didn't stop. They got worse. The night after they left, I found the attic ladder pulled down. No one had touched it. Inside the attic, on the wall behind the boxes, written in smeared black, "Now she's free. Now we can come inside." I didn't show Jess. But I didn't sleep. Neither did Emily. She stayed up all night, talking to someone we couldn't see, laughing softly, and humming the same lullaby over and over. The one from her music box. The one that stopped working 3 months ago. That morning I noticed the locks. The one on the basement door, unlatched. The chain on the back door, hanging loose. The nails we hammered into the windows, pushed out, from the inside. I tried to tell Jess it was nothing, but I couldn't lie anymore. Because when I walked past Emily's room, I heard her whisper, "They're not cold anymore. They're warm now, because they're real again." We tried to leave once. Jess packed bags. I booked a hotel. Emily didn't argue. She just stared out the car window, blank-eyed, whispering names we didn't recognize. We never made it off the street. The car stalled, twice. Then the tires locked up, and the lights went out. When I popped the hood, there was no engine, just empty space, hollowed out like something had been feeding from the inside. We didn't try again. That night, I triple-checked every door and window, deadbolts, chains, padlocks, even nailed shut the back window with actual iron nails. At exactly 12 a.m., I heard the first click. Not a loud one. Just the tiny metal whisper of a deadbolt sliding open on its own. I ran down the hall. The front door was swinging open. The porch light flickered. The wind had died. But the door moved like it had somewhere to be. I slammed it shut. Relocked it. Reinforced it with a chair. As I turned around, I saw Emily, standing at the end of the hallway. Just standing, not blinking, not speaking. And then she said, "They're inside now. They said it's okay. You don't have to fight anymore." I tried to speak, but something behind her caught my eye. The bathroom light turned on. The faucet started running. And behind the frosted glass of the shower, movement. A shadow. Small. Still. Watching. I ran to the door, threw it open, empty. No sound. No running water. Just wet footprints on the tile. Tiny ones, leading out and down the hall, toward Emily's room. Jess found her an hour later, sitting in the hallway, her eyes wide, face pale, skin damp like she'd been outside in the rain. But it hadn't rained. She was whispering something over and over. We leaned in close. "They live here now. They said this is their house again. We're the guests." Then she looked up and smiled. But it wasn't Emily's smile. It was stretched. Wrong. Like someone else was wearing her skin from the inside. I carried her to bed, but she didn't fall asleep. She just laid there. Eyes open. Mouth slightly parted. At 3:12 a.m., I woke to the sound of the oven timer. I stumbled into the kitchen, confused, only to find the oven door wide open. Inside, nothing. Just a wet doll's head, placed carefully on the rack. It was Rosie. Her eyes had been cut out. We found nails scattered around the house the next day. The ones I hammered into the window frames? Now in the sink, in our shoes. One lodged into the living room wall, bent from the inside out. Jess started crying. And that was before she opened the basement door and saw what was waiting. Not a person, not a shadow, an outline of something small, childlike, burned into the wall like a shadow left by a bomb blast. Fingers spread, mouth wide open in a silent scream. Beneath it, scratched into the concrete. Too late to lock them out. That night, Jess said we needed to run again. On foot, if we had to. I agreed. Until 12 a.m. struck. And she saw it too. A girl in the kitchen, standing there, dripping wet, her hair matted over her shoulders. Her face was eyeless, just sunken, rotting pits where her eyes should have been. And her smile, too wide. We packed in silence. No arguments, no denial. No more pretending this was just a string of bad dreams or psychological breakdowns. Something lived in that house, many somethings, and now they didn't just haunt the backyard. They lived in the floors, the walls, our daughter. I don't remember who said it first, but once it was spoken, it became gospel. We leave. Tomorrow. We didn't sleep that night. We sat on the couch with the lights on, suitcases by the door, keys in hand. Jess held Emily the whole time, rocking her like she was 3 again, humming songs from when she was a baby. Emily didn't hum back this time. She didn't speak. She just stared at the ceiling. And then, at 12 a.m., the house exhaled. That's the only way I can describe it. Every door in the house creaked at once. The windows fogged up from the inside. The basement light flicked on by itself. And upstairs, footsteps. Software, measured, tiny. They made no effort to hide, no more games, no more whispers, just the sound of presence. But we didn't move, we didn't run, we just waited. and at 3:33 a.m., the back door opened, by itself. We didn't shut it. We took it as permission. At sunrise, we were gone. Jess buckled Emily into the back seat. She didn't speak. She looked out the window with the same blank, dreamy stare she'd worn for days. The red X we'd washed off her hand had returned overnight, this time burned into her skin like a brand. We didn't ask questions anymore. I looked at the house one last time before starting the car. The swing was still. The grass around it blackened in a ring. The attic window was open. And in it, them, the children. 6 of them, just as we remembered. Standing shoulder to shoulder, pale faces watching us leave. One of them raised a hand to wave. They all followed. Their smiles wide, cold, and somehow satisfied. But there was something else. A 7th shape. A space where one child used to be, now missing. I didn't want to look at Emily, but I did. She had finally blinked, and she was smiling now too. Just slightly. As we turned onto the main road leaving Belridge Lane behind, I heard her whisper in the softest, calmest voice. They said I'll be back when I turn 12.